Surprisingly few sexual misconduct cases are reported by San Diego Unified School District. A look inside the numbers. A bill to tighten restrictions on exemptions for vaccinating kids causes emotional clashes in Sacramento. And severe injuries are sidelining NFL players in their prime. What it means as the season begins for America's most watched sport. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, San Diego sports journalist Jay Paris, reporter Ashley McGlone of Voice of San Diego, and reporter Will Huntsberry, also of Voice of San Diego. Well, stories of widespread sexual abuse by priests, scout leaders, doctors, coaches, teachers, and other adults working with kids have been sadly prevalent in recent years. That's why reporting of relatively scarce sexual misconduct incidents by San Diego Unified School District personnel is being called into question. And Ashley, let's start there with the reporting. How many sexual misconduct cases have been reported by San Diego Unified in the past decade or so?
So San Diego Unified is telling us and produced just 10 cases showing discipline of employees of all kinds over the 10-year period for sexual misconduct that ended in roughly the end of 2017.
Okay, and that number does seem awfully low. I mean, how many employees are we talking overall with this school district? And over, as you say, a 10-year period.
Right, roughly 13,000 to 14,000 every year, and more than 6,000 of those are teachers.
Okay, and I guess it's hard to gauge. There's no standard for this, but we'll get into it in a little bit on some of the numbers with the other districts and all. But are there actually, there were many more teachers, though, that San Diego Unified reported to a different state agency, right?
Right. Some data that we got from the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing shows that San Diego Unified reported 45 educators over roughly the same 10-year period to the state for educator misconduct. And so we don't know if all those cases were sexual in nature, but 45 cases over, again, the 10-year period. Plus, that doesn't include any of the non-teaching employees, and there's no state agency that tracks those cases or investigates them at all.
And what does the district say about the difference in those numbers and in the numbers overall?
Not much. I've asked them, how did you guys conduct the search? Because we filed a records request back in November 2017 with all school districts in the county. Yeah.
I'm going to ask that in a second. But anyway, and what did they respond?
Just that they conducted a reasonable search. They did not answer questions about how their search was conducted, but that they produced everything that they could find. Okay.
And then, tell us about, because Voice went about this in kind of a methodical way, and tell us about what you sought to find out and the requests you made around the county.
Yeah, November 2017, we filed the same records request with every school district in the county asking for cases of sexual misconduct complaints, discipline, investigation records against employees and officials and contractors. California courts have upheld the public's right to those documents when the complaints are well-founded or if the employee is disciplined at all, even privately. And we wanted to see kind of what is the breadth of the problem in the region's public schools, and also see how school districts respond to those sorts of complaints. Again, we only get cases, the public only has the right to see those cases where they are determined to be well-founded. And so again, they're saying they've got 10.
And you got quite a range of responses from the various districts, right?
Right. So San Diego Union High School District employs just like 550 teachers. They gave us 6 different cases over the same time frame. Grossmont employs about 1,000 teachers. Again, still a fraction of what San Diego Unified does. They gave us 26 cases.
Yeah, so that's why these numbers are kind of raising some eyebrows here. And the reporting with San Diego Unified, they weren't all that forthcoming, were they?
They took more than a year to give us anything. That's why we're kind of talking about this now, even though the request was filed back in 2017. They took a while. They did give us 10 cases. Again, one was already a highly publicized sexual abuse case with a conviction. Another showed a principal harassing employees. But yeah, they're standing by their number 10. So.
And you have reported specifically on some of those confirmed cases, have you not?
Yeah, Will has as well, about one of the principals. And there was a teacher they found had groped and kissed an elementary school student. He was allowed to quietly retire, which is often the case in some of these things. They reach an agreement rather than terminating, just leave. Sometimes they pay them to leave, and they go quietly, and no one's the wiser unless they get a hold of these documents or they're referred to a law enforcement agency.
And Will, what about in the schools themselves? What's the reaction, and what do parents have to say, and maybe staff members, when these cases come to light?
Yeah, I mean, obviously these cases are really terrifying, and I think when parents learn about what's going on, they're really worried. The phrase in the field is like passing the trash, right? So what will happen with these educators a lot of times is, Instead of dealing with the problem, the school will move the person on. Maybe they'll move them to a different school. Maybe in some cases they'll even give them a promotion where they're not working with kids because they've decided that's the best they can do legally.
Would they warn the next school that this has happened and this person's coming?
The settlement's often, the district agrees in the settlement or the separation agreement to not report or share that information. They make their mandated reports to the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing and leave it at that, and kind of say any future employers that ask us, we'll just give them your employment dates and say, again, they've moved on or they've retired.
And of course, you've got a teachers union, a very strong organizing group there that's advocating for teachers. Does that complicate the situation in reporting and handling these cases?
So it is interesting because San Diego Unified, like other schools, the labor union contracts say that complaints will be handled at the lowest possible level. And so there has been a discrepancy in the past where it seems that complaints over the years by students against, for instance, a La Jolla High School physics teacher maybe didn't leave the campus, maybe just stayed in the principal's desk drawer. Although then there was a case where the district said, hey, we don't have any complaints for this teacher who kept his job for years and years, even though he was known for touching students. But recently they discovered a box of documents showing that they had substantiated some pretty serious groping allegations years and years before he ever retired. But they said, kind of, whoops, we just discovered this. And I asked them, have they made any changes to the way they conduct their searches to respond to these sorts of requests in light of that? And again, they just say they made a reasonable search this time around.
Basically, they found it in a closet or something, right? I think they told us like, oh, well, we told you we didn't have any records, and whoops, turns out there was this room with these extra records where we didn't look, and there were some there. Which
they found while responding to a subpoena from the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, who had previously not heard about these complaints.
Jay?
Just curious, is the culture changing? I mean, going forward, looking ahead, or since this light's been
the spotlight on all this?
I'd like to think so. I mean, there is a difference. One of my colleagues, Kayla, has been reporting on, like, school districts do handle these complaints differently. Some have the principal investigate. Some do refer immediately to law enforcement. Some interpret grooming behaviors differently as something they need to investigate or just kind of give a warning. But I think more awareness around this, and also students knowing what they can and cannot tolerate, is important too.
Well, what about the state and the enforcement itself? If the reporting is this different among districts in just one county in California, isn't the state coming back and saying, hey, wait a second here, what's going on?
They are dealing with a backlog of cases themselves. And again, even this case with this La Jolla teacher, students have made complaints recently because the district never reported him over the years. And he's been appealing. There's a potential that he's going to appeal to the Attorney General's office. The public, other than getting documents like we've done, is not made aware of this on like their public website, on the credential. So they're dealing with a backlog of cases. They're kind of, they say, doing their best to kind of handle this, but it is really often left to the local districts to do the right thing, to follow the law, but also be proactive with their trainings and teaching people how to, how they should and shouldn't behave with students, and also other employees who need to be onlookers and report things that maybe seem inappropriate between employees and students.
All right, short time left on this segment. What is the public generally entitled to know about these cases?
Yeah, so again, the California court...
And obviously a privacy to protect too, and
right.
You're doing an investigation, and just because some complaints have been raised doesn't mean it's founded.
Correct. Yeah, so the public, the employees have the right to privacy, but the public also has the right to know how the government operates. And so in cases where complaints are investigated and determined to be well-founded, or that employee is disciplined because they found some reason that they needed some discipline or a reprimand or a warning, the public is entitled to see that. The various court cases have gone up and the judges have said, yes, the public gets to see that. Now, if a complaint is made and the district says this is bogus, we don't get to see that, and that's okay. We're not fighting for those sort of documents.
Kind of like a police investigation doesn't result in arrest or charges, and that's that. Okay. Well, we'll look for more reporting on that. It's a fascinating story. Well, few issues have become as fraught with controversy in recent years as vaccinating children against disease. A fraudulent study of 12 children by a now discredited researcher was published in a respectable, medical journal 20 years ago. It linked the vaccine against measles, mumps, and rubella to autism. That link has been thoroughly debunked, yet the anti-vax movement, so-called, persists, a movement whose impact prompted California's Assembly this week to approve a hotly debated bill on this topic. And we'll start with this new law. What does it call for?
Yeah, so this new bill has had quite the journey. It started by saying that we would have public health officials in California who would approve vaccine exemptions. There are a couple other states that do this, the progressive beacons of West Virginia and Alabama, I think. But that, people were really wary of that bill. The governor was really wary of that bill. So now what we're looking at is a bill where if a school has less than a 95% vaccination rate, public health officials can investigate what's going on at that school. Or if one doctor in particular has issued a certain number of medical exemptions, public health officials can look into that too.
Okay, and that 95% rate, that's a key threshold, right?
It is, yeah. It's like community immunity, or a little of a tongue twister, or herd immunity. Basically, if 95% above of the population is vaccinated, outbreaks generally just do not happen. And the places where we have seen outbreaks happen in the past few years and past few months in this country are places where there are pockets of more people who are not vaccinated. So we're below that herd immunity.
Falls below that. Now, Governor Gavin Newsom should point out, a father of four himself. He's got some reservations on this legislation. What's his role been in this debate? And he's still not satisfied with this bill, right? Even though it's passed the Assembly.
Yeah, that's right. He's been a little skeptical of it all along. I think it's been dialed back because of that. And he hasn't said he would veto it, but he has said he's looking to make some technical modifications to it. So I think we should definitely be aware that technical modifications could mean that the teeth get taken out of the bill further.
So it's still up in the air, even though we've had the action this week in the news what it had passed. But that's a little misleading.
That's right. We got to wait and see what the governor
We don't
does.
know what's really going to happen. Now, principal co-author of the bill, Democratic Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez of San Diego, she blames, quote, a handful of unscrupulous physicians profiting from putting children at risk and making schools less safe, I should say. And you had written about a doctor here who was quite controversial. We talked about it on the show before, and remind us of that story.
Yeah, we talked about Dr. Tara Zanfleet, the South Park doctor, as she's known on her website, and she had written nearly one third of all the medical exemptions for San Diego Unified. So literally in the hundreds. So, she is somebody who would be potentially impacted by this bill. Her and other physicians who are known as vax-friendly in the community, I think she would dispute that. But they write exemptions sometimes for reasons that other medical professionals completely disagree with. On the records that we got, it showed that she was writing exemptions for family history of autoimmune disease, family history of allergy. And, in some cases, if a person has an autoimmune disease, doctors recognize that as a reason not to get a vaccine.
Legitimate exemption.
A legitimate exemption, but family history is a completely untested theory, other doctors in the field say.
Now, taking that example of that San Diego doctor, if this bill were to come into law and to be enacted, how would it restrict a doctor like that?
Well, what it appears it would do right now is it would allow public health officials to investigate her. So presumably it would allow them to access some records that they can't now access. I mean, that's a big problem with investigating doctors now. Only one person, Dr. Bob Sears, I think he practices in Orange County, has been sanctioned in California for his reasons for writing a medical exemption. I mean, what proponents of the bill say is that basically the people who want these exemptions for not legitimate reasons are kind of in collusion with the doctor, and there's no way they're going to agree to give up their medical records. So this would give investigators more leeway to get at that kind of stuff.
Okay.
What do those sanctions look like? What does that mean? Do they have like a moratorium where they say you can no longer write exemptions for family history? What would that?
I think it would be some kind of probationary status of their license, or in the most extreme cases, get your license taken away for a certain amount of time or revoked permanently.
Okay. And what's the main argument for those who are against vaccinations of their kids? Why do they want to make it easier to get exemptions? What's the main thrust of that?
Well, they say that vaccines are more risky than the rest of us realize or want to admit. And, you know, vaccines do carry risks, but they're extremely small risks, and their benefits are extremely big. And the medical community is largely in agreement on how the benefits outweigh any tiny risks that might be associated with them. I think vaccine skeptical people seem to keep insisting, despite many studies that have shown otherwise, that they're actually very risky and more risky than people are letting on.
And of course, there's been some national figures who have pushed this, some celebrities, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I believe, has been out there.
Rob Schneider from the Adam Sandler movies. He got in a big feud with Lorena Gonzalez about it. They've had some shouting matches over it. It's been intense.
Yeah, and this got nasty, as I said at the outset, in Sacramento. This whole discussion got pretty angry. There's some demonstrations there, some loud things, some crosswords.
I think somebody even pushed Senator Richard Pan, the guy who helped introduce the legislation.
Yeah. Now, getting back to that 95% threshold that is critical, do we know? Does the public know? You know, which schools are below that and which places? I mean, how do parents react if they say, hey, we're at 91% here? What's going on? I don't want my kid in that school.
Absolutely. We do have that information available, but currently there's no trigger to give those parents power. You know, and this would give society or the state, or however you want to say it, more power in that case. Right now we can see where those schools are. There's, I think, 12 to 15 elementary schools in San Diego Unified or San Diego County where we're below the threshold. So yeah, the data's available.
And we're seeing some cases break out and measles and these sorts of things?
All over the country, obviously. I mean, one really horrifying case was in San Diego in 2008. Some of the people who are really put at risk are children who are too young to get vaccinated. And there was somebody who came into a San Diego hospital and had chosen not to get vaccinated, got the measles. There was also a 10-month-old baby there who was not old enough to get the shot yet. That baby got the measles from the other person. Really horrifying experience. It went from 18 to 12 pounds in like 5 days or something. So, you know, roughly 1 in 1,000 people can die from the measles. So obviously,
it's a serious disease. Well, we're out of time on this, but we'll certainly see what happens in the state and how this goes forward and when it's enacted and the timing on that. Well, we're going to move on. Fans of the National Football League were stunned when star quarterback Andrew Luck suddenly retired last month. The Indianapolis Colts Pro Bowler, the #1 pick in NFL's 2012 draft, called it a career at age 29. Here's his reason why.
For the last 4 years or so, I've been in this cycle of injury, pain, rehab, injury, pain, rehab. And it's been unceasing and unrelenting, both in season, and off season. And I've felt stuck in it, and the only way I see out is to no longer play football.
And Jay, how unusual is it now to have a star NFL player in his prime give up millions? I mean, they're walking away from a lot of money in the day.
Yeah, especially at the quarterback position. I mean, you're talking these days they can play into their 40s like Drew Brees and Tom Brady. And I think that was one of the biggest takeaways, that it was a quarterback. Now, you've seen running backs do it. You know, Barry Sanders did it,
famously,
Detroit Lions,
right.
And even you might even remember Jim Brown back in '65,
right in his prime.
He 29 to be an actor, and Terrell Davis locally here, and Lynn Swann and Gale Sayers. I mean, guys at skilled position guys that get beat up. But the way the game is now, quarterbacks can play into their 40s, and he's probably leaving a couple $100 million on the table, which just shows you how much he was hurting.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as we said in the open, most watched sport, the NFL, right. People are more aware than ever how brutal the toll can be on players. So talk about that tension between that and the NFL's campaign to portray the sport as safer than ever.
The fans don't care. The fans are betting on everything. The fans are going to the game. The fans have their fantasy league teams, and there's such a disconnect that you're knowing this guy is going to blow out his knee. You know this guy might have dimension problems later in his life. You know how dangerous the sport is, but it's entertainment, and that's how they look at it. And they, the league tries to put on a good face, if you will. They're not benevolent. I mean, they're not doing this out of their out of the kindness of their heart.
It's money-making, profit-making.
It's money-making, and then years later when the insurance companies come back and say, why didn't you protect these guys? Well, they go, look, we put these rules in where you can only hit them here. We put the rules in where you can't hit them in the head. We put these rules in. So
head-to-head contact.
Exactly. So it's a $15 billion business, and people love football, and it's only going up. It's only getting more popular.
Now, football fans in San Diego, across the country, of course, were shocked by the suicide of Chargers great Junior Seau in 2012, and the postmortem exams on Seau and other players showed the concussion syndrome. And, of course, there was a movie about that. The NFL famously fought that. Explain that settlement. There was a big battle. They finally have worked it out. Has that been beneficial for players, or are they still battling it?
Yeah, it's a battle. And there's been over $660 million in claims, and they have paid out $500 million in benefits. But it seems like for the majority of the claims, 62% of them, over 3,000 players, only 14% of those players have been compensated. It seems like the dimension and the after effects of playing, it's fallen more into legalese than medical reasons. And a lot of these gentlemen I've got to know, and writing books about former players, they're passing on, and their condition isn't getting better, and it's almost like they're slow walking and they're stalling, and the legal system, the guys that are older, and they're hurting now, and they need that money now, and it's a shame that they can't fast track that a little quicker.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because you've written a book about the Chargers, about the Los Angeles Rams. You've covered football for decades. You've known a lot of these guys, and you mentioned just now the older players. But what happens when you're talking to players who are playing right now, like Andrew Luck, for example? I mean, you bring up with them, hey, how tough is this? What are the injuries like? How do you do it day to day, season to season? Get up and decide you're going to come back for training camp again next year.
Yeah, I think it's those 3 hours people see in the week where these guys are gladiators, and they're running out there and they're adrenaline and whatever else they may have coursing through their body. It's those other 165 hours. It's a guy getting up early to stretch so he can go in and get a cup of coffee. It's a guy getting up early to find the tub. You mentioned Junior, the great Junior Seau. He was such a guy that if the training room opened at 6, he would get there at 4 to get his treatment so the other guys didn't see him. He never wanted to see him limping. He never wanted anyone to see him in the training room. And it's that badge of honor, that warrior mentality that unfortunately the guys look the other way when their body's barking at them now. Their body's telling them this isn't right, but it's that lure. It's they know what they're signing up for, but they don't want to let down fans. They don't want to let down their family. They're trying to make a living, but it's a brutal game. And when you walk into a locker room right after a game, you almost feel like a first responder coming up on a car accident. I mean, these guys are that beat up.
They're going through a car accident every week.
Yeah, every play, really.
Every play.
Yeah.
Well,
do you think now that we've seen this big retirement of a player in their prime, do you think we'll start to see more people do this? Is there's more awareness about it?
There has been more guys doing it. There's more education about it now. And it used to be in the old days, if you got hit, well, you got your bell rung there, son, or you're seeing stars. You would almost laugh it off. And I think the players are more cognizant of the ramifications of what could happen on a big hit. That being said, if you say you're hurting, sometimes they find somebody else. That's just the nature of the business. NFL is not for long, and they run through those players pretty quick.
Right.
Are retirees being more vocal about it impacting the younger guys, do you think?
I think so, and Mike Ditka and a couple of the other old pros, the old Hall of Famers, they're out there voicing it, and they're out there trying to get the money for the older guys. I know the Chargers used to be, Thursday was always Alumni Day, and the alumni would come out, and those guys would be limping, and those guys would be hurting. And sometimes the young guys would look at them, and sometimes they go, there's a couple old guys coming by to watch practice, but it's a heavy toll. It's a heavy price, and it's a short window. These guys can make the money, but the effects of those games last long after the final whistle.
And you mentioned, though, the game remains pretty popular, though there were some stories in recent years that TV ratings were starting to erode a bit.
Yeah.
Do you think this has an impact on that? Or
that narrative's a joke.
The money is there.
The money is there. 11%. The franchises went up last year. 2.8 billion. The average, the Cowboys are worth 5.5 billion. It's like your Labor Day barbecue. You got a big plate of food, and on that corner of the cob, maybe just a couple kernels are missing. They got a lot of food there. And the Chargers, they went up 10%. They're worth 2.5 billion now. So plenty of money, and with the betting, the betting and the competition between more revenue streams.
Fantasy leagues and everything
Yeah,
else.
it's a heck of a business.
I want to ask you before we're done here, what about the impact this has had on kids and parents concerned and Pop Warner youth
Right,
football?
that's where you really see the biggest change. You know, 5 straight years, the high school prep numbers have been down in football. Even the lower levels, Pop Warner, they're not letting him hit as they used to.
Yeah, California has a bill that goes into effect, I think, in a couple of years here, where on the contact in the
contact at a young age, and really it's trickled up or down from the NFL. I mean, the Rams don't allow tackling in practice. And when I was covering the game under Marty Schottenheimer, they would put a big circle around called the old Oklahoma drill, and 2 guys would just go at it as long as they could with everybody cheering on. We've gone from that to the Rams not letting anyone get tackled in practice. That's a pretty big leap.
All right, couple seconds left. Rule changes all the time, but they're bigger, faster, stronger. You can't really make this a safe game. It's a contact
Yeah,
sport.
it's like taking the engine out of a car and calling it auto racing. You know, it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. Okay, well, fascinating stuff. We'll see what happens as we play out in this season. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, veteran sports writer Jay Paris, voice of San Diego reporters Will Huntsberry and Ashley McGlone. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today, and be sure and join us again next week, next Friday, on the Roundtable.